Hello and welcome back to Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. And this week we are looking at what could be broadly described as the Alice in Ultraland promotional tour. Cobain, BBC's 6 Music Psychedelic Mini Mixes, 25th of September 2005. On the day of Alice in Ultraland's release, Gaz was on BBC's 6 Music to promote the album with an interview and several short mini mixes, each a few minutes of psychedelic music. These turned out to simply be short excerpts of Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble Volume 6, coming up in a second, and thus of very little interest to anyone other than serious collectors. A Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble Exploding in Your Mind, Volume 5 or Volume 6? You'd think by 2005 this kind of thing would have been easier, but no. There is no officially documented date for the 5th Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble Mix. The Podroom release gives a date of 14th September. The archives of my news page state the 24th September, and everywhere else states the 2nd of October. Throw in the fact that the Podroom version actually contains Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble Volume 6, labelled as Volume 5, and things get very confusing. So, yeah, promoted as an FSOL Presents Amorphous show, but released in the Podroom as Amorphous, it's once again very clearly Amorphous Androgynous with the presence of AA material, and the rest being largely psychedelic in vein. The mix opens with a snippet of Al Jones, then a Bill Hicks routine laid on top of music from the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, with Alice in Ultraland track The Prophet being the first full track on the mix, the first of many from the album, tying it in thematically with the previous year's 6 mix, as opposed to the earlier, largely Dougans Cobain free mixes. Coupled with 21st century material from Devendra Banhart, Dead Meadow and Robert Plant, this is the most contemporary selection of tracks since the first volume in 1997. Samples of Delia Derbyshire and Barry Bermond even bring back 3D Headspace tour memories, taken from the same record as the black and blue and green environment. Musically, however, the vibe is still largely fuzz-soaked psych rock, jazz fusion and folk, with a couple of brief diversions into psychedelic pop, the Monkees' Porpoise song as an example. Robert Plant's appearance is in the form of his cover of Tim Buckley's classic Song to the Siren. I'm frankly surprised Gaz would accept anyone other than his beloved Liz Fraser singing the track. The OK Let's Go 543 Transmit sample, another hint of FSOL in the mix, to go alongside occasional voices saying the band's name. I'm Here samples from Nights, another 1996 tour sample, also appears. The Witchfinder is also here, but only in its opening sections, the rock part being drastically remixed and mangled before fading out. The show closes on an exclusive 7-minute version of The Wicker Doll, a marvellous version that adds a more sinister touch to the already brooding track. One hopes this version will one day be released. The show is a rarity in that the complete track list is actually known. The mix was released in the Podroom in November 2008 and removed a few years later. It has since been posted on the Monstrous Bubble Mixcloud page, rightfully retconned as Amorphous Androgynous, but still incorrectly labelled as Volume 6. A Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble Exploding in Your Mind, Volume 6 or 5. As with the previous week's Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble, there is no officially documented date for the 6th volume in the series, the Podroom giving a date of 21st September, the archives of my news page stating the 1st of October, and everywhere else stating the 9th of October. Throw in the fact that the Podroom version actually contains Volume 5 labelled as 6, and yeah, we're still in confusing territory. The one thing we are certain of is that these two shows were broadcast a week apart on James Hyman's XFM slot The Rinse. The cover is the first Monstrous Bubble radio show cover to be credited to Amorphous Androgynous, albeit still FSOL present. A female voice, possibly Diane Harris, states this right at the start of the show. After the introduction, the John Brown-Bill Hicks combination from the previous show also plays, followed by 2 more tracks by Grover Washington Jr. and Coltrane Santana that also featured on the previous show. Later on in the mix, a further track by Devendra Banhart is repeated from the previous week. One track in the tracklist, something labelled as Nigel's Hot Shit by Nazareth, very much does not exist. This volume is by far the most contemporary of all the Monstrous Bubble mixes, with 11 post-70s tracks, not counting 9 Amorphous ones also featured. 3 of these come from David Holmes' Ocean's 12 soundtrack, clearly a favourite at the time and quite possibly an inspiration on the next batch of Amorphous material, The Cartel, released 7 years later. Elsewhere, Tomorrow's My White Bicycle is utilised for its intro effects only. I remember being disappointed when it cut out, the track being one of my favourites of the late 60s British psychedelia boom. While the 1980s are atypically featured, featuring Tears for Fears is Beatles homage, Sowing the Seeds of Love, a track put together in a very amorphous fashion, albeit 10 years earlier. Two brief snippets of unreleased Amorphous material, Coconut and Indian Pudding and Pipe, are included, the former supposedly released as a white label 12-inch. Nobody has ever uncovered one of these, and the part here is mixed in with the David Holmes track so much that you can barely even hear it. Gaz's 1997 Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble announcement features a few times. Cosmic Funkoid Rocktronica Ooscape on the Freeway Radio Wave announces someone. Jolly good. The Future Sound of London moving further into the future feels very out of place. A run of 6 Alice in Ultraland tracks takes up the bulk of the show's second half, with Indian film music, freak folk, early electronica from Silver Apples, hip-hop from the Beastie Boys, ambient prog, acoustic glam, bluegrass, panpipe music and playful psychedelia. The mix is by far the most diverse and unusual Monstrous bubble since the first show in '97, with far less emphasis on extended funk and jazz fusion grooves, and even a touch of FSOL in general. The 1996 tour outro, You Were Right and That's Why Tonight, sample closes the show. Once again, the mix was temporarily available on the Podroom, it's now available to listen to on the Monstrous Bubble Mixcloud, still incorrectly labelled Volume 5. The Amorphous Androgynous, a monstrous psychedelic bubble exploding in your mind, Volume 7, BBC 6 Music, 30th of October 2005.
The Future Sound of London presents Monstrous Psychedelic Bubbles by the Amorphous Androgynous.
So begins another Monstrous Bubble Mix, and then...
Hi, this is Cobain from the Amorphous Androgynous, bringing you another monstrous psychedelic bubble on the 6 Mix.
In a startling change of format, the 7th volume in the series is presented by Gaz. Hey, at least you have a definite date for this one. I suggest that you reach deep down inside yourself there. From Silent Running comes in. A touch of FSOL appears. Gaz then has a brief conversation with some samples in a manner reminiscent of the 1996 tours, and then he introduces his good friend and fellow member of the Amorphous Androgynous, Chris. Wait, what? There's no Chris listed in any liner notes of any Amorphous album, or mentioned in the lineup of any of their gigs. Of course, if you turn to the Amorphous promo shots from earlier in the year, you'll see him lurking at the back next to the horse.
The Future Sound of London. Cosmic space music. Move them further into the future.
Was that Stephen Hawkins?
Hawking, Chris, Hawking. There's a lot of banter between the tracks, and indeed over them. The majority of the Secret Chiefs 3 track is obscured by them chatting about going down to the LSD gym. Honestly, it should be utterly insufferable, but it's surprisingly down to earth with a certain amount of self-aware mockery of the kind of hippie nonsense one might expect from them. It's actually very funny in places, Gaz's sense of humour really shining through. He's always shown himself to be witty on occasion in the past, and a lot of it really comes through here. Even the worst bits are no less cringy than Yage and Cyberface. The mix is split into 4 half-hour sections, allowing for Radio 6 music to throw in trailers and news between. The first focuses largely on new music, with most tracks coming from 2002 to 2004, a refreshing change in contrast with a lot of past shows. After the wonderfully abstract Secret Chiefs 3 and a short bit of Sebastian Tellier is a track by the Earlies which had been sent to Gaz and Brian with a mind to them remixing it a couple of years before. Gaz promises they'll definitely get back to them, they just work on a different time frame to most people. This is quite possibly the most brutally truthful thing he's ever said. And of course that remix has never been done. After an unknown track, there's always one, Gaz and Chris talk about DJs, Gaz making a God is a DJ joke that flies right over the American Chris's head. After a Supergrass track, Chris complains about his noisy neighbour and tells a brief story of 3 bears. Now there's loads of the hairy bastards. And then more music from Ocean's 12 and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, clearly 2 soundtracks that appealed to Gaz at the time. Part 1 closes with an announcement.
This is the Amorphous Androgynous, the past, present, future sound of London, on the 6 Mix, BBC Radio 6, playing you some outer space fantasy music courtesy of the man Joe Meek. We'll be discussing him, his life, the play Telstar, then going into a cosmic mix of the frenetic up-tempo beat bongo variety, playing you some tracks from our forthcoming album, Alice in Ultraland, and of course continuing the journey, riding the back of the monstrous psychedelic bubble after this short break.
This tells us quite a bit. Firstly, that the show was delayed by well over a month, with Alice in Ultraland released 6 weeks before the broadcast. It also confirms that FSWell was still an ongoing concern, in terms of promotion at least, and the frenetic up-tempo beat bongo mix is a signifier that this is structured more like a regular radio show than a proper mix. The mix itself turns out to simply be a segment of the previous Monstrous psychedelic bubble.
Did Joe Meek ever meet Phil Spector?
No, but they both shot people. That's interesting, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But not each other.
Not each other, no.
Are you sure?
Well,
The long chat about Joe Meek is passionate and interesting, with Gaz saying he'd recently seen the Telstar play, which made him cry, and Chris is clearly a big fan, rambling on for a long time before Gaz amusingly cuts him off with,
Okay, that's enough.
Yeah, sorry.
That really is enough on Joe Meek.
Yeah.
Eventually we get some Amorphous. Chris says how proud he is to be on Harvest, which is a bit awkward given that he's not in the band. He also appears to know nothing about the label, thinking Neil Young was signed to it, confusing the label with Young's album Harvest. Then there's a rare moment in Gaz talks directly to more critical fans.
For those people that suggest we've become the retro sound of London rather than the future sound, we have a quote, which I'm going to get the eminent Chris, the ambassador of Atlantis, to read for us.
The present and the past are perhaps both present in the future, and the future is contained in the past. T.S. Eliot.
So that's you told. The frenetic beat mix is jokingly referred to as the repetitive strain section. Even this features a pair of them nattering over the top, including Gaz mentioning the white label release of Coconut, and discussion about Hitler and the Third Reich, because, Nazis are fun. This marks the 8th time I've heard Mystic Mood's Cosmic Sea in the past few weeks. Then an announcement that after the break they'll be playing some influences, as well as conducting an interview with Garry Lucas, who is taking a short break before going on tour in Australia with the Amorphous Androgynous in November. It's worth noting that this was the only official announcement of the Australian dates, on the last day of October.
Less chat, more music.
Yeah.
It is a strict policy of this music station that there should be less chat and more music. You have been officially warned.
So get on with it. Play the bleeding music, will ya? For God's sake.
Do they keep to this? I think you know the answer. The Sohail Rana, Noonday Underground and Anand Shankar mix from 2001's Annie Nightingale bubble is up next in the Recycled Moments list. In a surreal moment, Gaz then encourages listeners to visit the Six Music website to get in touch and see the track list, sounding very much like a conventional radio presenter. There's no previously unplayed music in part 3, although the Is It Real, Does It Matter sample from 1996 Environment Is This Real is an intriguing flashback moment. Gaz talks at length about Anand Shankar's influence on the band's direction in the late 90s. Chris informs us not to do anything because when you create a movement, you inadvertently create the anti-movement. It leads fittingly into Frank Zappa's psychedelic satire Flower Punk. It was found the use of material from We're Only In It For The Money odd, given that as an album it stands vehemently against almost everything the Amorphous Androgynous stands for. Jodie Mitchell and Charles Lloyd are played in the influences section. The phone interview with Garry Lucas is a very different segment, reminiscent of the band's plans to include interviews in the original Kiss FM mixes. He talks about his career with Captain Beefheart and Jeff Buckley, as well as his love of the Amorphous Androgynous. In the background, Buckley's Tongue plays, followed by the Amorphous track The Witchfinder, itself featuring Lucas on guitar. Part 4 finds Gaz spinning some tracks not heard on previous mixes once more, including Aphrodite's Child member Demis Roussos, Captain Beefheart, Led Zeppelin and more Ocean's 12 score. Chris claims the dance music revolution had less of an effect on society than the hippie revolution in the late 60s. I'm not sure I'd agree. The British government responded to raves by changing the law, which is far more fight back than the short-lived flower power generation achieved. But then Chris and I probably have different musical tastes too. Gaz claims meditation should have been included in rave culture. He clearly never heard many of the bad mid-90s ambient trance albums that took that path. Chris makes a worrying remark about how we should all learn to use our telepathic gifts instead of electricity, before undercutting it by effectively pointing out he's talking bollocks.
Most of the record companies are actually owned by
Monsters from another planet.
Yeah, that always makes me laugh. One final Amorphous track, the Always Glorious, All Is Harvest, is played before a closing duo of Dead Can Dance,
one of the most stirring and beautiful pieces of music ever written, in my humble estimation, actually,
and Jeff Buckley, a pairing first heard over 4 years ago. Gaz and Chris bode us farewell, and the mix fades to silence. This would prove to be the final Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble mix broadcast on the radio for nearly 7 years. The show met with some resistance from certain fans, inciting a lively discussion on the otherwise very quiet FSOL list at the time. The presenting and narration proved very unpopular with a lot of people, while others, like myself, found it surprisingly entertaining. The appearance of some random guy called Chris, combined with the live lineup, opened a discussion about whether Brian was being shunted out of his own band, a concern which plagued the fanbase for quite a few months. I have to be in a very specific mood to listen to this mix, largely one in which I feel like Gaz and Chris talking crap over the music, but musically it's my second favourite Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble mix after the original. Released on the Podroom in November 2008 and removed a while after, the mix has not made its way onto the Monstrous Bubble mix cloud. Gaz Cobain, The Amorphous Androgynous, Earthcore Global Carnival, Melbourne, 26th of November 2005. In November 2005, the Amorphous Androgynous live band travelled to Australia to play at the Earthcore Festival. Gaz mentioned it was happening on the 7th Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble show on Six Music, but otherwise no official announcement was made. Fans discovered the news and information by Google, admittedly spotted as early as May. Why must they be so bloody awkward? The brief Australian tour was apparently quite successful, and the band enjoyed it but had huge issues with the promoter. Gaz told Transfusion magazine it was underpinned by a petty thief promoter lying and cheating his way through the 2 weeks, a really desperate character. Therefore I'd have to say another favourite memory was kicking him and seeing him evicted from his own gig. You gotta laugh at that. The biggest point of contention between the promoter and the band was the use of the future sound of London. Obviously the promoter used it as a bigger name rather than the Amorphous Androgynous, but then people were turning up expecting FSOL. The two acts were much more widely seen as separate projects at this point, so it didn't really work out very well at all. We have very little information about the show other than Gaz was due to perform a DJ set between 6 and 7 PM, followed by a 90-minute full band live set. No setlist is known, although short videos on YouTube reveal that Mellow Hippo Disco Show, All Is Harvest and a cover of Jeff Buckley's Grace were among the tracks performed. Gaz Cobain and the Amorphous Androgynous, Earthcore, The Peak Crossing, Gymnar, 3rd of December 2005. Part of the Earthcore tour in 2005, the only reference to this performance online is a brief listing at setlist.fm. It's likely to have been a Gaz DJ set and band performance as with other shows on the tour. Gaz Cobain and the Amorphous Androgynous, Earthcore hits Queensland, Brisbane, 5th of December 2005. Less information is known about this show than the Melbourne date, but some footage does exist. Once again, the performance involved a Gaz DJ set with a live band performance later. YouTube footage includes clips of The Emptiness of Nothingness, the Mellow Hippo Disco Show, The Witchfinder, and We Have Explosive. Flickr user Webgirl has a massive album of photographs from the show, which are worth a look. The Amorphous Androgynous, Prince Bandroom, Melbourne, December 2005. Another largely unknown performance, just a simple reference on Gary Lucas's blog that they also played an incandescent set at the Prince Bandroom in the heart of Melbourne's swinging Fitzroy Street beach scene. That's your lot. The Australian tour no doubt took in other shows, but as I say, there was zero promotion of this. Nothing on the official website, nothing in the official newsletter. To be honest, most people probably didn't even know it was happening. The Amorphous Androgynous, Parallel Universes. Around the time a Bestival appearance was announced for the following year, Gaz also hinted at a secret show stating the band are in the process of relocating to parallel universes and time through Limitless is evaporating hyper slow. What did this mean? Taken for the usual Gaz nonsense at the time, in hindsight it definitely appears to hint at what is listed on YouTube as the band's performance at the Parallel Universes Happening. The internet has absolutely no reference to this at all. Brian doesn't recall it, but from the videos thinks it might be footage of a show in Moscow, although that might also be because of the flowers which were also seen at an earlier Moscow show. There are none listed for this era. Dave Sanderson is in the video, so it seems to be 2005 or 6. Was it genuinely a secret gig for a small number of friends? Some videos seem to show Gary Lucas on guitar, while on others only Stu Rowe is to be seen. Is it a compilation of different gigs? Honestly, who knows? Tracks played included All Is Harvest, Elysian Fields, The Witch Hunt, The World Is Full of Plankton, The Witchfinder, and the Mellow Hippo Disco Show. and a very brief mention of a 2006 show, although only just, on the 5th of January 2006 at the Colour House in Paris. Doors 8 p.m. A flyer, probably from the Amorphous Androgynous MySpace page. Did this gig even take place? There is no reference to it anywhere on Google. Who knows? Honestly, it's almost like Gaz didn't actually want any fans turning up to these shows at all. And that's it for today's relatively short video. That's as close to a promotional tour that the band have really done this century. And with that, the Alice in Ultraland era was over. In fact, there's not really been a new Amorphous album in the conventional sense since. Simply side projects and archive material, meaning this wrapped up the first period of the Amorphous Androgynous and would become more of a background project from here on in. Much to the relief of many, many fans. Do let me know your thoughts below. Did you witness any of these gigs? Do you have any more gigs that happened? There was at least one turned up when I was originally writing this series for a blog. So yeah, do leave me a comment below, and there are also like, subscribe, share buttons down there if you want to press them. All interaction really does help my channel, all support is really appreciated. I will be back next week, and I will be finally talking about the future sound of London again for the first time in what feels like a year. I hope you'll join me then.